Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Jennifer Nuckles, CEO of R0. R0 is the first biosafety technology company dedicated to making the indoor spaces we share safer, healthier, and more productive. Jennifer, I'm so excited to chat with you. And as I mentioned before the show, not only because of your interesting entrepreneurial journey, but also what you're working on at R0 and really the maybe even and we'll get into the discussion, the change in a lot of our physical spaces being a little bit more safer and healthier and being conducive for not only communication and good productivity, but also just a safe environment overall. But before we get into that, what made you join as the CEO? You're not the original CEO. So tell me the story of how you got involved at R0 and essentially then how you ended up joining as a CEO and taking the company by the reins.
That's great. Thanks so much for having me, Julian.
Of course.
So I joined R0 in October as CEO. I'm also chairperson of the board. So I've been working with R0 for 3 years. I was the first independent board member. So I joined the company at the very earliest stage, right when seed was raised. We've raised through Series C. So we've raised 170 million. We just announced our Series C, which was 105 million. So huge testament and kudos to the team that have gotten us here over the past 3 years. So I joined R0 3 years ago as the board member by way of introduction from another board member. So he had been on my board at a prior startup and he had asked me to be on the board, which I did for several years. And then the company decided about a year ago that they were going to do a CEO changeover, really because there were 3 founders who did a phenomenal job. And now it was time to bring in an experienced, kind of mature operator to take the company to the next level.
Yeah. And talk about that transition. How are those discussions when you go through a transition like that with the previous founders? And how do you kind of also not only make sure the transition is smooth, but also reinstill that for the rest of the team that you're continuing the direction that the company's been going in and only continue to improve, what you're doing?
Yeah. So when the board decided, and I was one of the board members, decided that we needed to make a CEO change, we put together a list of candidates, a short list of candidates within the area and began interviewing candidates. And what was very complimentary to me was that all of the candidates kept saying, well, you already have your next CEO, which is humbling and also a testament. So we made the decision that we were going to do the switch May of last year. There was quite a lengthy interview process. It took the whole summer, essentially. And I had the offer and I started in October. I was coming from a very big seat. So I was a Section 16 officer, a named executive officer at SoFi, which is social finance. It's a publicly traded fintech. We went public 18 months ago. So I was running one of the 3 group business units. So about a third of the company. It's a $1.5 billion P&L, about 4,500 people. So it was a really big seat. And it was a big decision for me to decide to leave. And candidly, I made the decision because I believe in the power of inflection and disruption that R0 is conducting in market.
Yeah. And when I've heard this many times over and I've talked to another founder who ended up taking the seat as a CEO, or not another founder, another CEO who took the seat and being a previous board member. What goes in behind that decision-making? What do you see in terms of the company and where it's at? Is it needing the injection of a new leader for growth to stimulate growth or scaling, or is it building relationships in a certain sector that a certain leader has standing with prior to that? Or is it multiple things that really you have to account for when you make that change?
I think it's a really good question. So at least in my experience, and I've had 5 exits through technology companies, and each one of those companies has had a CEO changeover, whether it was Zynga. I was the chief marketing officer of Zynga for a number of years. I had 4 CEOs during that time, 2 of whom were the same person, the founder that I reported directly to. And every time the decision is made, it's based off of the stage of the company and what's needed to reach kind of that next phase of growth. So I read a lot of books on leadership, a lot of books on company growth, and there's a project that was done through Google that was called Project Aristotle and Project Oxygen. And it goes through kind of the different types of leaders that are essential at a different inflection point of a company. And where R0 is right now is not very super early stage. We have product market fit. We have a number of products in the market. We have strong revenue, phenomenal growth, and it's really the opportunity to scale at a pretty big clip versus where we were headed to. And so we were looking for someone with very strong commercial background. We were looking for someone who has ability to scale a business, the ability to put processes in place, kind of operational muscle. And I think it's kind of testament as to how companies go about those changes.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to think about what you bring to the table and where the direction of the company is going to go. And I'm curious, tell us a little bit about the traction. So tell us a little bit more about R0. What company, or excuse me, what does the product do? Who do you service? And also, what are you excited about in terms of this next stage of growth?
Yeah, great. I'm really happy to talk about this. So the company, as I mentioned, started 3 years ago. So many companies were started in the midst of COVID. I give all of these founders and entrepreneurs a ton of accolades because it's very difficult to start a company and forecast what's going to happen when the world is effectively shutting down.
Yeah.
So we launched with our flagship product. The genesis here was the knowledge that all of us had, which is the world shutting down. People are missing seeing other people. The importance of indoor air quality has never been higher, which is a little bit ironic to me. And Julian, my background, I spent 10 years at Clorox after business school. So I am intimately familiar with the importance of air quality and surface disinfection. So it's been really meaningful to me watching the awareness and importance increase over the past 3 years. The other thing people saw is that as humans, we spend 90% of our time indoors. And what we all missed over the past 3 years was the ability to gather with our friends and our family and our coworkers and sporting events and social events. And not only with COVID, but with all the other pathogens that are spread indoors. And so you think about cold and flu. The first year of COVID, cold and flu was basically eradicated in the United States. You see this past winter, cold come back with a vengeance, flu come back, MRSA come back, RSV, people are getting staph infections. Like the industry that's actually on the forefront of this is both the hospitality and healthcare industry, because they know how fast things spread amongst humans. So we started with a flagship product. It's called the Arc, and it's a freestanding UVC tower. What it does is it uses the power of light to disinfect indoor spaces within a matter of minutes. 99.99% of all pathogens are removed. And this is at a much lower cost than the competitive products. And we also have a complete software and IoT connected hardware system that's integrated within all of our client systems, whether it's hospital systems or building management systems. And what we do is we use our risk modeling, it's proprietary risk modeling, patented, and 3D visualization of our infection risks within these shared spaces to kind of optimize implementation for each building. And what we saw was that this really took off kind of in the early days of COVID as people were very, very aware of the spread of indoor pathogens. Then what happened was we launched a series of other products, so not the freestanding tower, but actually installed products. And these started being installed in commercial real estate, in public sector buildings, in healthcare, of course, in education, and sports facilities. And so what's happened, that kind of the tailwind of people becoming aware of the importance of indoor air quality is now really a testament to the market and where it's going. Yeah. You're even seeing the government become aware of this. There's a governing standard called ASHRAE, which us as R0, a small little technology company, got put on ASHRAE board. And so we're helping set the standards for indoor air quality, which will be rolled out this summer.
It's incredible. It's so funny. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the cartoon Hey Arnold, but there was an episode in there. Yeah, you are. So there's an episode in there where he becomes one of the characters becomes an extreme germaphobe because they are privy to the understanding that there's microorganisms in the air, on the surfaces, no matter what. And so then obviously they reconcile and he learns to live with this. But to your point, there's a lot of ones that do cause us harm in the environment that we want to be productive, want to work safe at, or just be around other people. This technology a little bit more. Has this technology been around and hasn't been implemented? What's been the incumbent beforehand? And seeing that you've seen it on both ends, being on the chemical side of it, but now on the more innovative side where it's less of an intrusive technology.
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say in regards to comparison products, so you're absolutely right. Petrochemicals have been used in indoor spaces for 100 years, right? And I say that's coming up from Clorox, which is over 100 years old. The ability of UVC to be used instead of chemicals is less waste, less environmental impact, less runoff into the water, less damage to skin and eyes, and far more sustainable because there's no substrates being thrown out, there's no packaging being thrown out. The other impacts from an ROI standpoint are right now what we're facing in the United States is a massive shortage of labor.
Yeah.
And we've seen this even over the past 10 years as frontline workers have actually been leaving the workforce. And you see this with teachers, you see this with doctors, with nurse practitioners. And by 2030, there is forecasted to be a shortage of 130,000 doctors within the United States. So just a couple of years from now.
Yeah.
And janitorial staff is being hit really hard as well. So our products are autonomous. So the installed products run 24/7. They protect the spaces every single minute, meaning, Julian, if you and I were sitting right next to each other, and I know you're coming off of a cold, and you were coughing on me, I would not get sick.
Wow.
And so this real time protects the spaces that we're occupying. I like to think of this as 0-day InfoSec protection.
Yeah.
When this became really big in the security industry, we think about how much money companies spend protecting their IT equipment. They really should spend the same money protecting their human capital, which is the most valuable asset all of us have.
Yeah. And what does that do? I'm no biologist, but what does that do if we're not, say, exposed to these, whether it's pathogens or microorganisms, viruses, things that are in the air? Does that decrease our immunability, or does that essentially make us essentially stronger because we're not fighting so many things off daily?
Yeah, that's true. It can make us, it cannot compromise the immune system, but also the ability for the microorganisms and the pathogens to not spread real time. And so in general, it just protects all of us because patient zero is isolated and everyone who comes into contact with that patient is not spreading it elsewhere. And I think what's phenomenal is that people have really woken up to it's really a drag to be sick, and it impacts not only how you feel, it impacts your productivity, it impacts the world that we're all gathering it in, it impacts GDP for the United States. And we essentially can't have, we're going to live with these situations ongoing forever, but we can't be relying on ineffective solutions to protect all of our people.
Yeah.
One thing that commercial real estate has done over the past year is started running their HVAC systems 30% more times, not 30% more. And the reason they're doing that is because really important with sleep and indoor air quality. It sounds like an airplane going by. It's really important to have indoor air quality. HVAC systems, so heating, ventilation systems, were not built to improve indoor air quality. What they're built for is to cool the air that we're in, right? And so these old, antiquated systems are running at an exorbitant cost to the environment and also exorbitant energy costs. So our system uses 1/20th the energy per effective air change versus HVAC. And we, again, don't have any of the disruption to the environment.
It's incredible. And thinking about a user and how it affects, I say user, but we kind of, if I'm in a building or in a location, I'm technically a user, but I'm not using the technology. It's being used in the environment. What's the effect on me? My skepticism, it always hits me. Would the effect of this type of light or this type of energy being emitted on us as people? Should we be concerned? Should we not be concerned? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's great. So UVC has been used in hospital settings for over a decade. It is well established as the best way to real-time disinfect and remove pathogens. Our 24/7 on products use a different light spectrum, so it's 220 nanometers. This is 100% safe to human eyes and skin. And our devices are all studied through a series of studies with Harvard. We have our clearance. Last year, we just applied for Health Canada clearance, which is just coming through. So we'll be both US and Canada approved. And so these devices are now being used real time in facilities like the Mayo Clinic, which is one of our strategic investors. Mayo Clinic is using our products to disinfect real time restrooms, waiting rooms, operating rooms where humans are gathered.
Yeah, yeah. I would think about the horror stories of going to the doctor and then getting sick from just by visiting.
Yes.
Obviously,
Yeah.
that we're a little bit more removed from that, but it seems like other places still have that as a chance. The last little question on the technology and how it affects, and what's the, if you know, the percentage of companies or locations or buildings or wherever people congregate that are being under-serviced in terms of
Oh, yeah.
biosafety and underutilized in terms of the newest and greatest technology that's out there.
Yeah. So the way that this is measured is called effective air change per hour. Most buildings right now are running between 2 to 3 changes per hour. We
Wow.
run at 12.
Wow.
And the government is going to mandate a minimum, which would probably be around 6. It may be higher, but just
Yeah.
for that alone, you can tell that the preponderance of commercial real estate, public sector buildings are being underprotected.
Yeah. It's frightening to think about that, but it's also exciting to think about the new
Yeah.
technology and how to implement that. And
Yeah.
as a CEO, you're shifting to you and your focus. How do you manage so many different ways that the company could grow, being
Yeah.
strategic partnerships with investors like the Mayo Clinic, or going into certain sectors like commercial real estate,
Yeah.
or going even that much deeper into healthcare, going into schools?
Yep.
How do you manage all those directions without running out of runway?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think it's always hard to say no to good ideas. We have to be very focused. We are focused on 4 verticals, which are commercial real estate, healthcare, education, and the public sector. And we have those 4 vectors described and identified based on our product market fit and our already interest in those markets. So we protect 1.5 million people. We have over 1,000
Wow.
locations where our products are installed at. And those are the 4 that we're focused on. In terms of operational excellence, it's really about making sure that the team is focused together. And that's one of the things that I bring to the team. So like I mentioned, I've worked in a number of industries. I've scaled a number of different businesses. I like to think about hiring the athletes that work together and see the market signals
Yeah.
and that can kind of unlock those together versus not work as well together. So one of the books that I read a lot and that I would recommend is the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership.
Yeah.
And this is a sort of the book club recommendation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a new paradigm for success. And it basically goes through a distillation of decades with CEOs and leaders. It's kind of radical, it's provocative, but it's how unconscious leadership is sustainable if it works for the team, your organization in the long term.
Yeah, yeah. It's so fascinating to think about the directions and also where the company could go and grow. And in particular, within this year, you mentioned you have some partnerships. You mentioned you protect a lot
Yeah.
of people. But what's going to be particularly exciting about this year? Now that you've raised the capital,
Yeah.
what is a lot of that capital going to be used for?
No, the capital is being deployed into R&D. So one of the things that I'm most excited about is our software capabilities. So what we have built is
Mhm.
the only continuous disinfecting system. And how this works is that we use all of our software to real-time profile the risks in a room. So we have launched sensors. What the sensors do is they take the actual blueprint of an indoor space and risk profile, whether it's based on asset tagging, human tagging, work floor, ventilation, the flow of movement. In a hospital setting, we identify whether someone is a doctor or a nurse practitioner by the color of the scrubs.
Yeah.
We look how many instruments are in the room, what the temperature is in a commercial real estate setting. So all of the environmental factors that affect the workspace. And then we provide through a real-time dashboard and analytics insights, the risk profiling of that space, which then through API calls with our disinfecting platform, makes sure that our products are running when they need to be, whether it's 24/7, whether the room's not occupied, they don't need to be on. And then all of this is available to the CFO, the chief sustainability officer, which is one of our big stakeholders, the janitorial and maintenance staff, to real-time look at the usage of the locations. And then the last step within the software is the analytics that are distributed, which identify the outcomes. So if there was a patient who was sick in the room, if there was a hospital-acquired infection, how much real estate was actually used, if the Mayo Clinic could use a space instead of for an operating room, instead use it for a pop-up clinic. So it's real-time optimizing the indoor spaces based on their proprietary data.
Yeah, yeah. And then Has there been any pushback on in terms of the monitoring, the censoring? I mean, anytime you introduce a lot of technology, there is some hesitation in the market.
Yep.
But what have you seen and how have you overcome it?
So everything is proprietary to the end user. They have real-time insights available on their dashboard. It's all in aggregate, so you don't look at the individual level.
Yeah.
Our customers really appreciate this data intelligence. They're using this to just be smarter about their environmental spaces.
Yeah.
And so whether it's hospitals looking to shave minutes off surgery, because that saves them millions of dollars over time, whether it's a Fortune 100 looking to not run their HVAC system a couple hours a week because that will save them millions of dollars and also help them reach their sustainability credits. So all of our customers are using the real-time data, and that's really where we're seeing a lot of the growth to be able to emphasize and identify what their risks are.
Amazing. What are some of the biggest challenges that R0 faces today?
I think you noted one, which is the product should be used everywhere there's indoor spaces. We have to be very intentional about who we are partnering with because we're a small company and we're only 3 years old. And so we need to make sure that we operate with high excellence. The second is that we are partnering with the government and kind of some large institutions. So there's a lot to be done to kind of shift a marketplace. If you think about when Airbnb came out, Airbnb was disrupting like the taxi industry or walking or houses, and that's Uber, or houses and hotels. And so these are large industries that have been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And so the pace of innovation, which is what I appreciate, is really essential. And so I think as startups and entrepreneurs, we always want to do things faster to make sure that we are able to do that in kind of the right process and the right order.
Yeah. If everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for R0?
So we would like to be, and we intend on being the largest and only continuous autonomous disinfecting system through both software, risk modeling, and API calls to the UPC portfolio.
Love that. I love that. I always like the next question. I call it my founder FAQ. So I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions and then we'll see where we get. So first things first, what's particularly hard about your job?
It's also Monday, March 13th, which this will go down in infamy as the last 48 hours, 72 hours. I think were incredibly hard for startup CEOs and their teams as the banking system collapsed in the United States. So I think the hardest thing about my job, which is also what gives me the most energy, is you got to know how things work. You need to be at 10,000 feet, but you also need to be boots on the ground. And when it means on Thursday, initiating payments early so your employees get paid because you're not sure what's going to happen with your bank accounts. And then on Saturday, going and waiting in line to establish new banking accounts. Like as owners, having owners mentality is really important, but it means that you're always on. Yeah.
Early on in your career, or is there anything that really catalyzed you to kind of go into leading and leading teams rather than going a different direction and specializing in a certain field? What was the itch that you had to scratch as an entrepreneur that led you in the direction?
So I love knowing how things work. So I spent a decade at Clorox after business school. And I remember at that time, we were given a decision if we wanted to be a GM or if we wanted to be a functional expert. And I chose the GM path. So I ran a number of businesses. I had grown up, obviously, in marketing and brand management. So I'd spent 10 years in marketing. And when I was wanting to leave Clorox, which I grew up at, spent a decade there, I'm very thankful to, I was given the advice of don't pigeonhole yourself in one industry or pigeonhole yourself in kind of one function, like hire the athlete, train the skills. And that's really stood by me because I've been in gaming, I've been in digital health, I've been in fintech, I've been in disinfection. And what I look to do is hire that athlete who knows how to make things work, know how to scale, know how to figure things out, and really hire for that agility. Yeah. Thinking about the week and the week for a lot of CEOs and founders, and how do you kind of manage the stress of the job? What is something in particular that you do that you've seen that's helpful to either recharge or distress or not be so impacted by news of the day-to-day that we all receive as entrepreneurs that we don't want to see at 8 a.m. on a Monday when we think everything's going to be okay. And then all of a sudden things are not. You're unexpected for the day. Yeah. I think the reality is we're all on 24/7. We wake up in the morning, we check our phones, we know what's happening. That's what makes us great operators. Several years ago, I had an offer to go and be a GP at a VC firm. And the reality is I'm a really strong operator. I like waking up in the morning and checking the prior day's results, whether it's mixed panel or your own internal dashboard. I like knowing how things work. And so I think having a good network, whether it's internal, make sure you have a team that you can trust. If your leadership team is the team that you want, that's great. You seal it. You have other people to bounce ideas off of. Having a network externally that you can run ideas off of, because as a CEO, some things you can't talk to other people internally about. And just making sure you have those resources. Last week, I was with a public company CEO who actually gave me a pretty good advice, which was if he ever feels like he's going into a one-on-one with one of his directs and he's dreading it, it's probably not a great relationship. So making sure you have those relationships secured, shored up is really important.
Yeah. What's one thing that you spend, if you think about your week, that you spend a majority of your time doing that you would like to allocate time doing something else?
Yeah. I think the most important thing we have as a finite resource is time. So each one of us has the same amount of time, 1,440 minutes in a day. You want to make sure that you optimize every single one of those. And there's some tasks that really should be delegated, not only because it frees up my time or others' time to do more valuable work, but also because it means you're developing your next bench strength. So delegation is really important. It's hard because a lot of times you can do things faster, but it's only gonna keep getting exacerbated. So knowing when to rely on other people and making sure that they have the resources and are trained to do so is really important.
Yeah. Is there something that you learned as an entrepreneur that you wish you learned early in your career? I guess, almost like advice you would give to another entrepreneur.
I've been given this advice on talent. The hardest thing that we go through is making sure the right people are in the right seat. Make the decisions faster. If you are trying to put a square peg in a round hole, it's probably not going to work. Give the athletes and the high talent a chance, but make decisions quickly.
Yeah. If you weren't working on R0, what would you be doing?
It was a really hard decision for me to leave SoFi. I was really passionate about the businesses that I was building. I had 9 businesses. They were all new for SoFi, and they were generating hundreds of millions, $1 billion of enterprise value. It was a hard decision to leave. I probably would still be at SoFi. And that's just the nature of the game, is that I decided there's 3 areas in life that are important to me. They are education, environment, and health. And it's a pretty rare opportunity to get to a company that intersects all 3 of those and also has the ability to disrupt a very large market and be mission-based on top of that. So doing good for the common good is important to me. If you can do that in a commercial outcome, pretty rare.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I know you mentioned it already. You mentioned one book, The 15 Commitments as a Leader, but what other, whether it's early in your career or what other books or people have influenced you the most?
Yeah. So since we're talking about podcasts, I always listen to How I Built This, which is a podcast that interviews a ton of entrepreneurs to see how they built their brands. It's like intimate moments of doubt and failure. A lot of times with entrepreneurs, the company is resting on your shoulders and there's no one else. And so hearing from other leaders, I think is really key. And then another similar, but it's a book, not a podcast, is Built to Last, which is a very similar approach, which is learning from companies that have gone from early stage to mid stage to final IPO or massive exits, because there's a lot of leading indicators that you can draw on parallels across industries.
Yeah. And the last little question, I know we're coming to a close here and I want to give you a chance to give our audience where can we find you. But before that, is there any question I didn't ask you that I should have or that you would have wanted to answer?
I think you can ask me about the impact on the environment. I think that because we talked a lot about the software play, but I think the largest thing that we can all do as we look at impacting the world, and we've all become aware of this, is climate change is real. Decisions that we as humans are making to improve our own experiences are having disastrous outcomes for future generations. So use technology to impact and better antiquated solutions. Then I have no doubt that UVC and far UV, upper room methods of cleaning the air, will be the norm in 5 to 10 years.
That's incredible. And last little bit is and also thank you so much for being on the show. But last little bit is, where can we find you as a founder or as a CEO? Where can we find you, R0? Give us your LinkedIn's, your websites. Give us all your plugs.
Please do. So r0.com. It will be great to hear from you. You can link into me under Jennifer Nuckles. Social platforms the same. Sometimes they go under the handle of Jen Nuckles, but would love to hear from everyone. New ideas, also business partnerships in the sustainability area, commercial real estate, indoor air protection, really important.
Amazing. Jennifer, it's so incredible not only learn about your journey but also about R0, what you're working on, what the technology is, and how it can really just better on all fronts, like you said, education, environment, and health. And I'm so excited to see where you will go, especially with that injection of cash. And so excited to maybe even be unaware of your technology, but now see it in physical spaces. So I hope you enjoyed yourself on the show, but thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Of course.